What if everything they ever taught you about being good is exactly what's been keeping you weak? What if that little voice inside that whispers, "Be honest, don't betray, do the right thing," isn't your conscience, but your chain? Morality, as it was sold to us, pure, upright, unbreakable, isn't a compass. It's a shackle. It holds us up, sure, but only as long as we don't move. The moment we try to advance in a world ruled by power, ambition, and betrayal, that same morality starts to feel like a stone tied around your neck. This isn't about glorifying cruelty or romanticizing lies. It's about something more uncomfortable, facing the fact that rigid moral codes, the ones that leave no room for cracks, were never made for those who lead, build, or resist. They were made for those who obey. And the more spotless your moral record is, the easier it is for you to become a disposable piece on a board you didn't design. Niccolò Machiavelli saw this with brutal, unsettling clarity. His world wasn't theory. It was blood, dirt, and raw human instinct. He watched princes fall because of their loyalty, republics collapse because of their righteousness, leaders destroyed not by their enemies, but by their blind faith in doing what was right. Machiavelli understood that in politics, virtue can be a trap disguised as glory, and those who cling to it without flexibility are bound to lose. Not because the world is cruel, even though it is, but because the world is. That's it. We're taught to distrust the liars, the manipulators, the ones who get their hands dirty. But what if those people are the only ones capable of holding the line, of keeping chaos at bay, of achieving what the virtuous only dream of? What if the real choice isn't between good and evil, but between effectiveness and collapse? Traditional morality gets handed to us like a safe haven, an inner guide to follow when the world goes dark. But in the realm of power, that guide turns rigid. And rigid things break. What does a ruler do when compassion turns into chaos? What does a leader do when honesty weakens their position? Do they stay loyal to their morals and watch their world fall apart? Or do they adapt, betray, survive? Machiavelli leaves no space for innocence. His answer is as clear as it is unsettling. Do what needs to be done. And if you must, hide your intentions behind the mask of virtue. And that offends us. Not because we don't get it, but because deep down, we know he's right. Because all of us, at some point, have felt the pull of doing the wrong thing for the right reasons. We've lied to protect someone. We've manipulated to survive. And then we've tried to convince ourselves it was a mistake, when in truth, it was a choice. A choice that prevented something worse. The problem is, we've been conditioned to feel guilt even when we do what's necessary. Moralist culture teaches us to be good, not strong. It teaches us to suffer with dignity, not to avoid suffering altogether. To lose with grace, not to win with strategy. We're raised like characters in a fairy tale, where goodness always gets rewarded. But the real story, the one written in blood, betrayal, and brutal intelligence, is something else. And Machiavelli was one of the few who dared to write that story with no filters, no illusions. He didn't pretend that what's right and what works always align. It's no coincidence his name became synonymous with manipulation and cold calculation. We hate him because he holds up an uncomfortable mirror, one that shows who we could become if we stopped being afraid of the dark. If we stopped needing moral approval from others. If we accepted that not everything noble is useful, and not everything useful is despicable. But does that mean throwing out all ethics? Becoming some heartless monster? That's a shallow take. Machiavelli never said we should act without limits. He said our limits must be flexible. Morality can't be a straitjacket in the middle of a storm. You can't steer a ship using a map drawn for calm seas. Sometimes you have to dump cargo, break rules, lie to the crew, not out of evil, but out of survival. The problem isn't having principles. The problem is believing they should apply exactly the same in every situation. Blind loyalty to rigid morality is just another form of cowardice, the perfect excuse to avoid hard decisions and dodge the weight of consequence. It's more comfortable to say, "At least I didn't betray my values," than to admit, "I didn't do what needed to be done." But the world doesn't reward purity. It rewards intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to act, even when everything in you wants to freeze. People obsessed with appearing moral end up sacrificing their power at the altar of consistency. And power doesn't forgive. You can't wield it from a place of naivety. You can't hold it with trembling hands. History doesn't remember the ones who were good and fell. It remembers the ones who did what it took and stayed standing. That's why morality, if treated as some inflexible code, isn't just naive. It's dangerous. It makes you vulnerable, predictable, easy to use. It turns you into an open target for people who don't share your limits. And worse, it makes you an accomplice in your own downfall. Because when everything starts to fall apart, you'll still be clutching your virtue, as if that were enough. And it won't be. Most people believe their strength lies in their principles, that what defines them as human beings is the line they refuse to cross. But what they don't understand, or don't want to admit, is that line isn't held by courage. It's held by fear. Fear of judgment, fear of chaos, fear of guilt. We've been taught that staying on the right side somehow makes us better. But what if all it really does is keep us small? There's a massive difference between being good and being useful. And that difference becomes brutally clear when the world stops being safe. When the rules stop protecting you. When reality demands choices that don't fit into the mold of what you're supposed to do. A leader who clings to their morality like it's gospel might sleep well at night, but they won't survive betrayal. They won't hold a government together. They won't protect their people. Because politics, just like life, rarely rewards consistency. It rewards the ability to read the moment, to get your hands dirty without losing your grip. Machiavelli didn't see this from some ivory tower. He saw it from deep inside the living, bleeding heart of Italian power, where deals were broken before the ink dried, where alliances vanished like smoke, where kindness was read as weakness and loyalty as foolishness. And he didn't celebrate it. He didn't turn it into some love letter to evil. He just named it, described it with the cold clarity of someone who's watched idealists fall, one after another, crushed by the machinery of reality. And still, we resist that mirror. We prefer the myth. The story of the righteous hero, the honest martyr, the incorruptible soul. It's comforting, sure. It lets us believe the world makes sense, that good triumphs, that being true to yourself is enough. But that comfort has a cost. It prepares us to be spectators, not players. It trains us for elegant defeat, not strategic victory. It turns us into admirable victims, never builders of fate. There's something perversely beautiful about someone holding onto their morals to the very end, even when everything falls apart. But what's truly hard, what few dare to do, is to hold onto a purpose beyond the principles. To choose when to bend, when to lie, when to strike, not out of greed or impulse, but out of strategy, out of necessity. Because sometimes the only way to protect what matters is to violate what's sacred. There's nothing more heartbreaking than betraying a part of yourself. But some betrayals are really transformations. Maturity, vision, a politician who lies to stop a war, a father who deceives to save his child, a leader who fakes compassion to gain the power he needs. Are they truly less moral than the one who, too afraid to get dirty, lets everything fall apart? Or are they maybe more responsible? More courageous? History is filled with leaders who knew when to be wolves and when to wear the skin of lambs. Caesar, Bismarck, Churchill, none of them were moral in the traditional sense. All of them could move between virtue and violence, diplomacy and manipulation, respect and fear. Not because they were evil, but because they understood that playing fair in a dirty game is just another way to surrender. The tragedy is, we're still raising new generations to lose, teaching them that telling the truth is a duty, even when that truth destroys. That staying loyal to your values is more important than adapting to the world as it is. We tell them not to lie, not to manipulate, not to use others. And then we throw them, naive and unarmed, into a world where all of those things aren't just common, they're expected. That kind of education is expensive. Brilliant minds that self-censor, powerful voices that fade out, potential leaders that sabotage themselves because they're afraid of looking selfish or unprincipled. Machiavelli, with his blunt, unfiltered voice, would shake them awake. Wake up. The world isn't what they told you. You're not here to be good. You're here to be effective. But that truth is so uncomfortable we'd rather mock it. Call him cynical. Call him immoral. As if dismissing him lets us dodge the deeper question he represents. And yet, there's a place where morality and cunning can meet. This isn't about becoming a monster. It's about accepting that sometimes you have to look like one to protect something greater. It's not about killing your values. It's about knowing when one of them has to be sacrificed to save the rest. Moral rigidity is like a tree that refuses to bend with the wind. It snaps. But the one who learns how to bend, when to be silent, when to fake, when to strike, that one stays standing. And staying standing isn't just survival. It's influence. It's power. It's legacy. Those who cling blindly to virtue die with a clear conscience, sure. But they die without changing anything. Without leaving a mark. Without saving anyone but themselves. Meanwhile, the ones who carry the burden of messy decisions, the ones who dare to play the real game, those are the ones who write history, even if it means they'll never get to be the hero in the story. Maybe that's the real dilemma Machiavelli forces us to face. Would you rather be good or be remembered? Would you rather live in peace with your conscience or move the world? Because you rarely get to do both. And the sooner you understand that, the less it hurts. Accepting that morality isn't an absolute but a tool, that's when your eyes really open. That's when you stop playing small. It's not as comfortable. It's not as clean. But it's freer, more dangerous, and way more powerful. Because only someone who dares to shatter their old self-image can become something new. And sometimes, that's exactly what the moment calls for. Not a spotless figure, but a capable one. Capable of staring into the abyss and still choosing. Capable of losing their innocence without losing their purpose. Capable of betraying their morality so they don't betray their mission. There are moments in life when we stop, not because we don't know where to go, but because some part of us refuses to move forward without the old compass we've always relied on. A compass called morality. One that, for years, has served as a symbol of who we are, a safe place, a shield against chaos. But then comes a time, sometimes marked by rage, sometimes by sorrow, when we realize that shield no longer protects. It gets in the way. It doesn't guard us anymore. It holds us back. And that's when the question Machiavelli never asked directly, but that echoes through everything he wrote, finally surfaces. Are you going to keep honoring your ideal self, even if it means destroying everything you were meant to build? The most painful betrayal isn't the one we commit against someone else. It's the one we commit against the image we had of ourselves. And that's exactly the kind of betrayal that separates those who simply exist from those who actually leave a mark. Because changing the world requires, before anything else, changing the relationship we have with our own identity. And that means breaking. Breaking with what we were taught. Breaking with the need to be loved by everyone. Breaking with the urge to always look consistent. Breaking with the fantasy that what's right and what's effective always walk hand in hand. This isn't about glorifying cunning as the highest virtue. It's not about giving in to cynicism. It's about understanding that sometimes the only way to protect what really matters is by being willing to get your hands dirty. And that doesn't make you less human. It makes you more complete, more clear-eyed, more dangerous, yes, but also more real. Because the truly dangerous person isn't the one who knows how to lie. It's the one who can't even imagine doing it because they're stuck playing a cartoon version of themselves. Some people go their whole lives without ever breaking their principles. And from the outside, that might look admirable. But if you look closer, more often than not, it's not integrity, it's fear. Fear of owning the weight of their choices. Fear of being criticized. Fear of being hated. Fear of losing the comfort of a morally untouched identity. And underneath that fear hides a more refined kind of selfishness, the need to see yourself as good, even if it means letting the world burn. It's easy to cling to what's right when you don't have to live with the consequences of chaos. History is full of those invisible characters. The ones who chose not to act so they wouldn't betray their values. The ones who didn't lie, but didn't protect anyone either. The ones who didn't manipulate, but let the lies of others shape reality. And then there are the others, the ones who did the unthinkable. Who bargained with the dark. Who broke rules, betrayed pacts, faked virtues. Not because they loved power for power's sake, but because they understood that sometimes there are causes bigger than ourselves. That not every choice is between good and evil. That often the only real choice is between two evils. And responsibility means choosing the lesser one, even when it hurts. That's the realm of the tragic, not the realm of villains, but of those who carry scars on the inside. Those who know there's no glory without shadow, no victory without guilt, no transformation without loss. You can't grow without letting go of pieces of who you were. You can't lead without breaking silences. You can't hold something together without giving up parts of your soul. And still, some people do it. They carry that ambiguity. They don't need to be seen as heroes to do what needs to be done. That's where Machiavelli's philosophy hits hardest. It's not a call for pointless cruelty. It's a warning against naivety. An invitation to stop measuring the world with rules written for dinner parties. To accept that political life, and by extension, life itself, is fought in the mud, not in pure ideas. And that if you want to avoid drowning, you better be willing to get dirty. To fake it when you have to stay quiet when needed, to look moral when it helps, and to act effectively when it matters. That doesn't mean anything goes. It means nothing stands on its own. Every decision has to be read in context. Ethics isn't a bunker, it's a tool. One that needs sharpening depending on the moment. What was unforgivable yesterday might be necessary today. What looked like betrayal last week might be the only way to protect something more important than yourself. A cause, a people, a future. Of course, living like this has a price. You lose your easy sleep. You learn to live with the discomfort of gray areas. You give up applause. Sometimes you even give up being understood. Because the world claps for moralists until it needs results. And then it calls the Machiavellians. The ones who know how to play. Who know how to bend without breaking. Who know how to sink so they can rise again. Who understand that masks are tools too, and that showing your face isn't always the bravest move. That's why having morality, if we define it as a rigid structure, can turn into the cruelest kind of betrayal, a betrayal of who you could have become if you had the courage to act beyond your ideal. And maybe that's what hurts the most. Not what others expected of you, but what you expected of yourself. The image of a flawless you that no longer fits in the urgency of the present. But only when that image dies can something freer be born. Something more dangerous. More real. Because there is no deeper form of authenticity than the one that's built from the awareness of your own limits. Real maturity doesn't come when you perfect your morality, it comes when you put it on trial. When you dare to ask it uncomfortable questions. When you test it against the world and accept that to stay standing, you might have to shift. To adapt. To change. Not to please others, but so you don't become a prisoner of yourself. Maybe the real question isn't whether to be moral or to be effective. Maybe the real question is, when does an inflexible morality turn into a form of failure? At what point does loyalty to certain principles stop being virtue and become stubbornness? When does the attachment to the good version of yourself start to betray everything that version once wanted to protect? And if you've got the courage to ask yourself that, then you better have the courage to listen to the answer, even if it breaks your heart. Because in the end, the dilemma doesn't go away. Life will keep asking for choices. Power will keep exposing contradictions. And the only real difference between the one who reshapes the world and the one who just watches it happen is that the first one dares to carry the weight of contradiction. Dares to not be perfect. Dares to betray his own image if that's what it takes not to betray the moment he's been called to rise in. And that, maybe, is the deepest form of loyalty there is. Not to a code. Not to a mask. Not to a fantasy of purity. But to a mission that deserves to be fulfilled, even if it demands letting go of the version of you that once felt untouchable. Because only when that version dies, can the one who's truly meant to rule be born.